Well, hello! We are going to continue our journey in Apothecary. We are now in London with Janie. She's gotten some homesickness tincture, and I think she's going to start into school in chapter 3. And therefore, your question is, oh my goodness, what is you impression? Ms. Johnson, you should proofread more carefully. What is your impression of St. Benden's school? At least I got the apostrophe S right. Okay, let's see. What is our impression of St. Benden's school? The next morning, I swallowed my aspen and honeysuckle over my mother's half-hearted objections to prepare myself for my first day at St. Benden's school. Showing up at a new school is never easy, especially in the middle of the year, when friendships are already established and hierarchies understood. In England, all of that was heightened to a terrifying degree. St. Benden's was a grammar school, and to get in, you had to pass a test. Most kids failed the test and went to something called a secondary modern school, which wasn't good, and where the kids were just biding their time before they could get jobs. So the students who got into the grammar school thought, rightly, that they were on top of the pile. The school was in a stone building with arches and turrets that seemed very old to me, but wasn't old at all in English terms. It was built in 1880. So it was practically brand new. It had dark paneled walls inside and paintings of old men in elaborate neckties, and somehow it had escaped bomb damage. 2 teachers walking down the hall wore black academic gowns, and they looked ominous and forbidding, like giant bats. The students all wore dark blue uniforms with white shirts, jackets and ties for the boys, and pleated skirts for the girls. I didn't have a uniform yet and wore my bright green Hepburn trousers and a yellow sweater, which looked normal in LA, but here looked clownishly out of place. Yeah, I would think so. I might as well have carried a giant sign saying, "I don't belong." The school secretary, whose tight gray curls reminded me of a sheep, gave me my class schedule. As a 9th grader, I was to be in what they called the 3rd form, but it wasn't anything like freshman year at Hollywood High. My first class was Latin. "But I don't know any Latin," I said. "I can't join the class in the middle of the term." "Everyone in 3rd form takes Latin here," the secretary said. "You'll be fine." Then she called to a startlingly beautiful girl walking past in the hall. "Miss Pennington," she said, "please show Miss Jane Scott to your Latin class. She's new from California." The beautiful girl stopped in the door of the office and looked down at my green trousers, then lingered on my scuffed canvas shoes. She looked up at my face with a bright smile in which I could detect mockery, but I was sure the secretary couldn't. "There are Sarah Penningtons in the United States. You probably know one. I'm sure they exist in France and Thailand and Venezuela. My Sarah Pennington at St. Benden's was a near-perfect specimen of her kind. She had no adolescence awkwardness or shyness about her. She had clear, rosy skin and wide blue eyes, and a long blonde braid down her back. She seemed to glow with the perfect health that money can sometimes bestow. She certainly hadn't been subject to wartime rationing. That she was rich and that her money had survived the war was clear even in a uniform. The fabric of her skirt seemed to move with her, while the other girls' skirts hung stiffly against their legs. It's possible that no one had ever denied Sarah Pennington anything, that her wealth and loveliness had ensured that she never needed to ask or aspire or even hope before the thing she wanted was there. The look on her face was one of calm assurance that world would always be so. I walked with her down the hall, feeling hopelessly inadequate. That was quite a description, I must say. "Our Latin teacher is Mr. Danby," she said. "He's terribly demanding, but so dreamy. He was a hero in the war." "What did he do?" "He was a pilot in the RAF and shot down all sorts of planes before he was captured in Germany. He was a prisoner of war for 2 years. After the war, he became a teacher, and he teaches as if he's still flying missions. If his students don't learn Latin, he thinks he's failed. Some people hate it, but I think it's lovely. I sneaked a sideways look at her. She spoke in a strange, artificial, grown-up way, and I wondered if she was imitating some English actress. She didn't talk like a 14-year-old. Mr. Danby's class had already started when we got there. I was prepared not to like him just because Sarah Pennington did, but he was undeniably appealing. He was young, with green eyes and long lashes and soft brown hair that curled at his temple. He wore an academic gown that was disarmingly rumpled, as if he had slept in as if he had left it in a heap on a chair and sat on it. He was talking to the class, and he seemed exasperated. The city we live in was once Londonium, he was saying, the capital of the Roman province of Britannia. Latin was spoken here in the streets, in the fish market. It is the language of Virgil, of Seneca, of Horace. I don't think it's too much to ask that you be able to recite a little. The students, some amused, some frightened, glanced to us in the doorway as a possible distraction. Mr. Danby turned too. "Ah, Miss Pennington," he said, "you're just in time for my rant." "We have a new student," Sarah said. "This is Jane Scott from California." It was startling in front of all those faces to hear my name announced so formally. No one ever called me Jane, and she made the state sound faintly ridiculous, as if perhaps I made it up. "Janie," I muttered, feeling the heat in my face. Mr. Danby said, "Thank you, Miss Pennington." Sarah beamed at him and sashayed in to take her seat. The class was seated in alphabetical order, which meant that I was seated right behind Sarah Pennington. A large boy named Sergei Shishkin, with dark hair flopping across his eyes, had to move back one desk to make room for me. "Sorry," I whispered. "It's all right," the boy whispered back. "I don't get called on in the back." He spoke with a Russian accent, and I imagined that a Russian kid would have an even worse time at the school than an American. Mr. Danby called up students one at a time to recite long passages in Latin, and I felt as if I were standing on a beach in heavy surf. Each student's recitation crashed over me like a wave of words, then withdrew again, leaving nothing I could understand. Finally, the bell rang and the class was over, and the students sprang to their feet. "Remember to do these translations of Horace," Mr. Danby called over the noise of books and papers and talk, "for tomorrow." I looked at the 2 Latin sentences he had written on the chalkboard, one long and one short, both incomprehensible. I gathered